The Star Trek team. We've got the Starships team back together. I love it.
This is it. Yeah. That's exactly what we have. Of course, this is going to be probably airing. I think by that time it'll be 4 weeks after Thomas Marrone was at the Star Trek season 3 premiere. So Thomas, I mean, we'll get to that in a second, but we're continuing our conversation about ships and all good things ships. I'm Michael DeSmuka, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, and also a blogger on Continuing Missions RPG, the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures RPG. And of course, we have with us today Jim Johnson.
Hey, everybody. Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modifius Entertainment, lo these many years, and co-host on this here show with Michael, going on 70 episodes now, something like that. It feels like just yesterday we started, but it's been a long time, and it's hard to fathom how the time has gone.
It's been a long road.
It has been a long road, getting from here to there. So anyway, we're going to talk about all kinds of cool stuff tonight. Clearly, we've got 2 all-star guests with us tonight, so I want them to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Thomas.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me again. It's good to be back. I am Thomas Marrone. I'm the art director for Star Trek Online. And I'm excited to say that we've got some new Star Trek Online ships appearing in Star Trek Picard this season. That I work with the team to get onto the show. So I'm sure that'll come up later as well. So I'll kick it over to you, Aaron.
I'm Aaron Pollyea. I'm a longtime Star Trek Adventures freelance writer. So yeah, I'm like one of the starship and science, technology, engineering kind of guys.
Yes, and of course, Aaron and Thomas were huge in the Utopia Planitia release that we had last year. That's a really big deal.
Yep, and fingers crossed, a couple of releases this year too. So we'll see how that all works out.
All right. So we've been doing an entirely popular series on character roles in Star Trek. We started with the doctors. We started the captain. We ticked it all the way down. And there was one character that all of a sudden, as an epiphany, we almost missed. But fortunately, we're not going to miss it because we're here today to talk about the character of the ship. Gene Roddenberry and Gene Roddenberry's instructions, the play Bible, or what do you call it, the ship Bible, whatever he had created, he actually gives clear-cut instructions that the ship is a character and should be treated as such. And so we thought it would be really cool for all of you out there who are GMs and players to think for a second. 1, how are you incorporating your ship as a character? And 2, are you thinking about going where no one has gone before and maybe possibly playing the ship itself? We've heard some of one of our show's producers, Jeff, actually talked on his. They actually play the ship, and it's a character. So we're diving into that today. I want to get thoughts all the way around about it. First, ship as a character. Give us some words on it, Aaron. Let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. A ship is a character because your ship is always there. When you're on the ship for most of your adventures, the ship is around you. The ship has a sound. It has a feel. And it doesn't matter if you have 2 different ships of the same class. They're not going to be the same. The people on board them are also going to change the ship to be unique and have its own flavor. And that's what I really love writing, when I get to write like a notable starship, and I actually get to really flesh it out like I was able to in the command book. Lots of words, and go, okay, how can was it the command book or was it Gamma Quadrant? Gamma Quadrant was what when I did that, like ships of the Dominion War, where I was able to like, oh, here's the USS Sutherland, and really detail out what makes the USS Sutherland unique. How it smells, even because it's slightly different. They have like tropical plants on board because they're known as a party ship. So just because it's something that Dax always used to say, oh, those Sutherland guys, they really know how to party. So there's like luau's on board, things like that.
So you're infusing each ship with its own personality. Yeah, nice.
Exactly.
Thomas,
I'll be quiet.
No, we're going to get really, we're pulling everything out of you we can in this hour. So Thomas, what about you? Ship as a character.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought a lot about this when Jim was gracious enough to generous enough to ask me to write the foreword to the Utility of Phoenicia source book, and I went through a few different drafts, a few different angles on that, and one of the and it was all centered around the idea of a ship as a character, and one of the things I really kind of fixated on was that scene in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, where I think we've talked about it before together as a group, but where you see the Enterprise for the first time after the refit, and I think you learn a lot about Jim Kirk in that scene, in the way that he reacts to seeing the Enterprise again. He sees her again for the first time, right? It's like he's seeing the love of his life after they haven't spoken for 10 years, and she's just as beautiful or even more beautiful than he remembered her, right? Like, that's the expression. Like, it's subtle, but I mean, really, you look at Shatner's face and like he's playing it like that, like he's seen a lover that again he lost touch with, and in the director's cut, they did something that was really cool to actually amplify this feeling, which is they actually there's a shot where you're just looking at Kirk's expression. In the original shot, it's just his expression as he's like staring out the window. In the director's cut, they actually superimposed a reflection of the Enterprise on top of it, so that you see the Enterprise, sort of the object of his desire, while you're seeing this look on his face of just sort of reverence and it really is love. Like, that is how he's feeling. So we learn about Jim's Kirk character through the way he relates to the Enterprise as another character, and there are lots of other examples in dialogue in the original series of Kirk referring to the Enterprise as his almost like betrothed or his responsibility, right? And so there's this interplay that the different captains have with their ships. Janeway is another great example of somebody who really cares about Voyager, and I think it's funny because Janeway, Kirk sees the Enterprise as his love and something that he needs to protect. Janeway, on the other hand, sees Voyager as like her colleague and almost like her only peer, like the only other thing on this voyage that has as much responsibility as she does, which I think is really interesting. So, yeah, I think you can definitely go down this rabbit hole in how ships are characters and how they all work together with a crew.
Well, we are going down that rabbit hole. Jim, ship is character.
Yeah, I was just going to add great comments from all of you. I think I'd add that one of the things I always appreciated, especially about the original series, I think, is the special relationship engineers have with their ships. I think Scotty is always going on about about his wee barons and the ship and the engines and just everything else about the ship. And to where he knows, he can. I mean, certainly the captain does because Kirk did, but he could hear every bolt and every bulkhead moving in that ship, and like he could tell just by listening or by feel probably what warp speed they were at, what was happening with the engines, et cetera, et cetera. And you get that a little bit with Geordi, and you get that with some of the other engineers throughout the franchise. Even I love that scene in Lower Decks where the lower deckers are talking about the different engine noises. It's like, oh no, it makes this kind of a noise. Oh, it makes this kind of a noise, and they just go back and forth. It's just this great riff, and it's a good reminder that like every ship sounds different, and even ships within the same class sound different because like as they roll off the assembly line, there's always different tweaks and modifications that the engineers are making to them, so that even though two ships might be of the same class, they're still going to be very different coming off the line. And I just dig that, and that just really reminds me about how they are different characters. Actually, it reminds me. I don't remember what I was reading, but it was something on the American Space Program, and they were talking about refurbishing Atlantis and Discovery, and they took them offline for a while, and they were redoing the interiors. It was just and this book had statistics for all the ships, all the shuttles, and like each orbiter weighed different and had different internal components and internal configurations and stuff. And like from the outside, you wouldn't really notice because they're all, they look the same to the layman, but like internally, all the inner workings were so different that they were all specialized for different types of missions and different types of payloads and different weights and stuff. And it's just like, I could go down into the weeds on that kind of stuff all day long. And what I think Thomas and Aaron have done really well is translating that concept into Star Trek especially with those ship write-ups you two do for all the different ship classes that we do, especially for Utopia. It's like, oh, every ship is cool and different and has a very specific role. But then even beyond that, you can even go into the next level of weeds and say, 3 different saber classes coming off the assembly line, they could be given 3 very different mission parameters and be fitted out with different weapons and defensive systems and talents and stuff. And I think that's one of the things that Nathan did a great job on when he was designing the game, was to have like your baseline space frame, and then you add on the layers, right? You add on the layer of a mission, and then talents and weapons and stuff. And it's just like, you just get into the weeds on this kind of stuff all day long.
Yeah. One of the ideas I think I tinkered with at one point, it might have been really early on, was giving starships a trait that was their shipyard that they were built in, so that you might have something that's built at Yo-Yo-Dyne Propulsion in Proxima, which has a slightly different feel than one that's made at the Antares fleet yards.
Good.
Might not change the stats any, but it might change the feel of the ship.
Yeah, I think Aaron, that's a great point, and I think it makes me reflect on the last 7 years of the game. It makes me realize that we've probably underplayed the whole traits idea in all of our officially released products and stuff. I kind of feel like we probably should have turned the notch on that. Maybe even added more content in the Game Master Guide and Player Guide to say like traits are really super powerful tools in your game, because it can tell so much of a story and be connected mechanically to some extent. But I think you're right. Putting some really cool, interesting traits on your ship is almost kind of like giving really cool values to your player character, right? It really helps make that ship unique and distinct.
Yeah, and I want to push ideas. How can we anthropomorphize our ships more, right? To get that, I love it when my players, when our ship, the Pioneer, takes a hit and they wince. It's like almost a flesh wound when something happens, and oh my goodness, and if a nacelle blows, that's just like sheer panic. So let's talk about that, because it's this isn't Star Wars. This isn't ships blowing up every week, and especially not the main character. So what endears people to their ships? What creates that connection, do you think it is, as game masters are writing their ship or players are talking about their ship in terms of affection, like Thomas was talking about?
I think you have I think it's a lot of little things working together. As humans, we tend to anthropomorphize things. There's if the TV show Community, I think the first episode that Jeff Winger has this great speech about how, if I take this pencil and break it, nobody cares. But if I take this pencil, call it Steve, and then break it in half, everybody gets upset, and I think there's a certain magic to that with starships, is they have, as soon as before your ship is commissioned, it's called, pre-commissioning unit 134 or whatever. But then they have the commissioning ceremony, and there's a phrase that they use, which is really cool. It's like, man our ship and bring her to life. They literally say that when they commission a ship in the U.S. Navy. And when that happens, it stops being, pre-commissioning unit 134 and starts being the USS Enterprise or, whatever. And so there's that. It's a trick. It's a mental switch that we flip when we look at these things. You cross that threshold, and now it's something that matters. Now it has a name, and it will kind of come to life almost like a child, right? As you get to know it and you get to use it and you learn about it. And you start to weave all these stories in your head about, this is, she's good in the straightaways, but hard on the turns, all that stuff.
Agreed. Names are important. So if you want to make a connection with your players and your ship, understanding the name that you choose for your starship is important. Because Michael, you have USS Grissom behind you. Why is Grissom important as a name? Grissom, Apollo 1. That's right there. That should give you kind of like, this person was important to the U.S. space program and died a tragic death, but we learned from it and then rose above it and went to the moon. Pioneer in, space exploration. You have a name is incredibly important. And stemming from that name, since your ship now has a name, never refer to your ship as an it. It's they, she, her, he, him.
Yeah,
I think you want to choose.
Yeah, I think a special point in any episode, and GMs, maybe you need to do this early on to start that bonding process, is go behind that name and talk about it. I know one of the first things I did in my game was create a placard for the ship with a quote from Arthur B. Sloan about pioneers, so that everyone on the ship, before they even knew we were going to be tossed 13.7 million miles away, is you're going to be doing stuff no one else has ever done. And I think that it changes. They even call themselves pioneers. Everybody on the ship, that's a special thing if you're called a pioneer, and that's a small club of people who get to have that designation.
And then, since with pioneer, you of course have the addition of the pioneer plaque that was on the probes, which is one of those connections to the past that suddenly you can go online and see an actual, this is what it is, and there's a real one flying out there. Make those little connections with the past, especially if it's a name that has meaning that is a modern type thing. Hey, I'm on USS Wasp. Great. There was a Wasp out there in real history. Find some connections, find some people that are linked to that ship in the past. And hey, maybe there's an artifact on board that's there as like a good luck charm on loan from, the Starfleet Museum or wherever. And you can talk about that as a game master or as a player and make it a plot point. Hey, I'm really interested in history, and I think that's very cool, and I can turn this into a scene.
Now there's an evolution happening out there we should talk about, and that's AI in Star Trek. So AI starships. We've seen the first one, right? Would it be right to say the Discovery was the first one, and then Lower Decks was the second one when it came to ships that were fully powered by AI?
I'd say Ultimate Computer, M5 Multitronics. Theoretically, I mean, because that technically was an AI computer, and it was in control of Enterprise for a bit.
And I guess, Voyager, or not Voyager, but Voyager was.
Well, I mean, you could make an argument for Voyager too, right? When the Doctor was in control, that was essentially just one program telling a different computer program what to do. That's
wow. Sorry, you just blew my mind. The Doctor is part of the computer's personality, Voyager's personality. Didn't even think about that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I kind of wish that they examined the Doctor. I mean, I think it's really just an artifact of like when Voyager was made, but it would be cool to examine the fact that the Doctor really is a computer program, right? He's a sentient computer program, but like he could go into any body. Mass Effect did this really well. If you haven't played Mass Effect, but they talk about how really it's the thing that is alive is the program. The body doesn't matter. That's something you could explore with the Doctor or Data, any sort of sentient artificial life. And I think the living ships is a really interesting thing, with Voyager and the Alito, and let's see, I guess now Discovery, in the 32nd century. And there are players, I've seen players run some campaigns where there's a holographic life form, like the Clear Skies campaign. They did Exio was their holographic first officer, and it was a discrete unit from the Ross, but it was still integrated with the ship systems. So there's a blurry line there that's pretty interesting.
We've done that in our campaign with the ship's computer gaining sentience, and she was a extension of the personality. Well, an extension of the ship and the concept of the name of the ship. So it's Pioneer. She took the name Pi and represented herself as like a 19th century exploring woman. It's kind of like the melting pot of all humanity in one form. And she was like a scientist and an explorer and grew through a few episodes that we had her, right, Michael?
Yeah.
It started off as kind of she was always presented as like a 20-something, but her personality was very undeveloped, very childlike at first, and then quickly grew through a few episodes and developed her own path.
That's
yeah,
really cool.
I feel like the ship almost gave birth to this character, and then she went on her own. But then it left the gap where, again, other sentient life forms were starting to be born from her, because it left such a wake in the bioneurogeopacks that now we have a second holographic program that is starting to develop sentient. Basically, what they did is when Pi left, she left a pie-shaped hole in the system, and a holographic character went into it and then used it to develop further itself. So it's created where now people are like, they don't know what's going to come out of the ship, but every computer program and every hologram is potentially sentient because of this.
That's a really interesting ship-related plot thread that they did on TNG. That would make a great episode, is following up on Emergence.
Moriarty's. Yeah.
No, it's not Moriarty. It's the one where the ship essentially becomes the entire ship becomes self-aware, and it starts building these connections to different systems. So the sensor system is automatically connected to the navigation system, and it like warps the Enterprise away just before it would have collided with some quantum string filament the crew didn't even know was there. And eventually they go into the holodeck, and we got to get to New Vertiform City, and like there's this like organism that's like growing in the ship, and eventually it like matures and flies away, but it was like completely it started out as just part of the Enterprise systems, became its own life form, became self-aware, and then left. So like meeting up with it again would be that would be a really interesting plot.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch this one. I forgot that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
There's so much great Star Trek out there that it's easy to forget from here and there. Well, we got 800 plus episodes now or something ridiculous like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's great, but it's just a lot of great content out there.
And I like that, I like the type of Star Trek where the technology does not immediately want to kill everybody. In Discovery, they had the AI becomes self-aware and decides it's got to murder everyone in the universe, right? And I felt like that was that's not really the angle I would have taken as Star Trek. Like Star Trek is pro-technology usually. So I think that's something cool about players' relationship with their ships. The ship is so many things, right? It's a companion, it's a tool, it's a community, right? Like it's where people live. So, there are a lot of ways that people can relate to ships and work them into the campaign and really and help and like tell those stories and give you settings for, whatever it is that you want to do.
Voice is something to really work on as a game master too, to make sure that when the computer responds, the computer responds in a specific way. I mean, it's easy to say, okay, well, I can write the regular TNG kind of computer voice, but you can say, hey, the computer here doesn't respond like that. It has, a masculine voice, or it has it likes using contractions, or it has a preferred way of addressing people. Like it'll actually tell you, Commander, my response, and then goes into the response, because usually the computer doesn't repeat your name back to you or something like that. But there's little quirks that you can do even with the computer response to make the ship feel a little different and more like a person.
Yeah, and one thing that they haven't done a lot of in Star Trek that happens on, I think, pretty much every real Navy ship is nicknames, right? They'll give the ship a nickname that doesn't really feel, you wouldn't guess, just coming in from the outside that that's, but sometimes it is, like the Big E, right? The Enterprise's nickname, and the Enterprise also had a nickname,
Gray Ghost.
The Gray Ghost. Yeah, like there's a lot of really cool options out there, and that's a really cool way to also, like, if your players do something really cool and you want to commemorate that and add that texture onto the thing, and be like, oh yeah, everybody in Starfleet, like they go to a bar on a starbase and it's like, oh, you're on the Gray Ghost, and people are like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, we thought the Klingons had got you, but you came out, and like it's just, you can just almost like use that as an achievement or an award to people that they earn that nickname from doing something incredible.
I think too, something that's underused in our game, which I want to start doing, it was written a new optional rule in Utopia Planitia book. And that is where the ship makes its role on itself by itself because it's automated systems. So we've seen that plenty of times where the ship is programmed to do something. And I think that's a great way. Let a player play the ship as a supporting character, a couple times and see how that works. And then, not shameless plugging Utopia Planitia again, but the mission briefs I did write in it are all ship specific. The sole purpose of each one of those mission briefs was to get you to know your ship as a person. And so there's, without giving spoilers, there's just opportunities for you to really feel what it's like to be the ship in there. And again, the goal on that when Jim asked me to do those mission briefs was the purpose of highlight the ship, show off what a ship can do, make them think in innovative ways. So by the time they walk away from these mission briefs, they're in love with their ship, as a person. So I think that has to be very intentional for the GM to do, because I have seen it where new players tend to let things blow up and not really care. And I'm like, ooh, I need to do a better job explaining that this ship is their baby,
Yeah. Use descriptive terms as a game master when your ship does something and describe it like it's a person doing that thing. Like she stumbles as she gets hit with weapons fire, or she spins and you can hear her hull scream, something like that as things tear. Just because that is what a character would do if they're hurt, scream, things like that. It helps.
Yeah, have her limping away from the system, whatever. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think we have a sidebar about that in Utopia, and just that just changing up that evocative language really makes a difference to get your group to make connections. The one thing I wanted to add, and I know we've all touched on it, is one way to get your characters, your players, even more connected to the ship, is to emphasize that ship is their home, right? And so if you get into a fight, you're just not dinging, you're not putting a dent into your car, right? This is your house. This is where you live. Like if you're in, like there's this very thin layer between you and certain death, right? Like if something happens to that hull and that hull gets breached, you're screwed, right? In a very significantly fatal way. And
one of the most painful episodes of me to watch for Voyager's Equinox. When we first meet the Equinox, it's so painful that these Starfleet people, that this is their home. You're like walking into a burning husk of a home. And it reminds me of like the fires that you see in Northern California. People lose their homes, or there's just, and that same feeling whenever I still watch that episode, is like, oh, there's no building this home back. It's just, I love how they made the Equinox a personality.
And have your players describe how they decorate their quarters.
Absolutely.
What do you do, and what is different about your crew lounge, or what is the briefing room look like? What unique things are there? Just to give it flavor, and then you feel more of a connection to the ship then as well, because you don't want your quarters wrecked because it has X, Y, and Z in it, and I'm gonna take that for where it is, take that as far as it can go.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. I think again, the ship has to, just like I know I'm a member of Delta Flyers with Bobby Duncan McDill and Garrett Wong, and I know that Robbie, one of his pet peeves was any episode where everyone didn't get starred in some way, that everyone didn't have a part, and so that kind of changed. I was like, okay, does my ship have a part in every episode?
Yeah.
To make it good there. Cool. All right. So
here's a non-sequitur. I'm just listening to you all talk and just thinking about, especially the Age of Sail, and how every starship, or every sailing ship, not every, but most sailing ships had a figurehead, right? And then in Star Trek, there's not really an equivalent because of the way the ships are designed. But I'm almost wondering if like the custom crew lounges is kind of an analog for that, because I think I want to say that we've seen a lounge on screen that had a figurehead in it, like as a statue kind of thing, but I may be blanking on that. But any thoughts on what the Star Trek modern day equivalent of a figurehead might be?
Ours has a wall of honor.
Wall of Honor. Okay.
For Lost, we have it for Lost Pioneers. We've referenced it a couple times, but there's a place where people can kind of, they're there at the party at all times, even if they've passed on. They're in the presence, and so that's something I thought was cool that the players created.
Yeah, every ship. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say every, but a lot of ships in the Navy have artifacts from other ships that preceded them with the same name, where like this is the China from the original USS Yorktown that was saved from the shipwreck or something. Like I'm saying that's exactly true, but it's stuff like that, right? And so it's like, and some of that stuff still gets used where it's like, oh, we're going to pull this out for a very special, we have the admiral on board for some reason, or a diplomat or something, we're going to pull this out. And it's in Star Trek, like the Star Trek 5, I think in the lounge there, they've got the ship's wheel, right? So like maybe that came from one of the original Enterprises. There's a bell, I think, too, there, or in another, I remember seeing a ship's bell. And actually in Star Trek 6, they also have a ship's bell that actually rings. Have you heard the chimes at midnight or whatever, right? And so like those naval traditions, I really encourage people to look up some of those because they're really cool. They add a ton of texture to the universe, and those traditions really give you a sense of place, and really build out the world, and like anything that makes you feel like you're stepping into, you're filling the shoes of people who came before you, which I think is really important for a service like Starfleet. And we talk about the identity of ships and the names of ships, and so much of the culture of a ship can be inspired by what the ship before it with that name did. And the Enterprise is obviously the greatest example in Star Trek, but there are there's like a destroyer escort in World War II who took on a battleship, right? And won or sunk this battleship or severely damaged it. And so for the rest of history, every ship, like there's going to be a destroyer named after that ship, and that's going to be part of their motto, is the heritage of that one victory. And it's something that the leaders, so like your command players, your first officer and your captains, they can, if you give them those stories of like, oh, you're the third USS Pioneer to bear the name, here are some things that the other US pioneers did, then you give them those stories, they can use that to motivate the crew, right? It's like, remember what the pioneers came before us, they didn't back down, they fought off 3 Klingon warbirds and lived to tell the tale. So by God, we're going to, history will never forget the name Enterprise, right? Like, so.
I love that legacy just for the reason that whoever has the Enterprise, there's a Klingon out there who wants to destroy it, just to chalk it on there. So inheriting those names can also be like, oh, you better be ready for it.
Threat as well as.
I almost, on a related note, thinking about heritage and history and like tying the past to the present and the future, I almost wonder if like the engineers who are actually building the ships in the dry docks and the shipyards, if they would just like quietly slide something important like a good luck charm or an important piece of heritage into the space frame, without telling anybody, right? Because it's an engineer thing, you wouldn't understand, but we know it's in the ship, we know it matters. And so like for a certain, like for the engineer corps on the ship, they know it's there, and they know that's a touchstone to other ships and to the history of the ships. I don't know. Like I don't know for sure if engineers do that when they're building ships. I'm going to guess they probably do, but
yeah,
sure, because if we say the opportunity, right? So
kind of related is on the USS Cole, after they refit, so the Cole was hit by a terrorist attack, and then they brought it in, they repaired it and recommissioned it. But where that boat actually hit, there's a little plaque and a memorial like at that spot on the boat, right? And so that's another thing you can do when you're talking about customizing, adding things, is if there's an important event that happens during your campaign at a specific spot that people remember, if a PC died or something, you could totally change the ship to to commemorate that happened there.
One of the things to add on to that, and I know I've seen it in some of your art, Thomas, is if you have a combat vessel or a vessel that's more suited to combat roles, nose art, it works. Nose art and kill markers. It might not be the exact best representation of what Starfleet is, but at the very least, nose art makes a lot of sense, or some sort of artwork on the outside of the ship that represents.
Ooh, first contacts. What if it represented first contacts? Paint something on there. Ooh.
Yeah, there's some
you know what I'm saying?
things.
Like I love the P-40 shark's jaws that I saw in one of your artwork. I'm like, because I love P-40s.
Yeah.
Shark's jaws, but I mean, it makes sense on certain starships that are, especially during the Dominion War. It's all about the setting.
You could totally paint one of those on the side of that. So I did that for the Defiant. For STO, we made a version of the Defiant that has a shark mouth, and we did a anti-Borg one that was called Cooperative Punishment, or Collective Punishment, and some others. It was a ton of fun, but I can see, especially if you're in the Dominion War bug zapper, that was another one that I was really proud of. But if you're in a scenario like a war with the Klingons and Dominion, I think those rules are going to get a lot looser, right? Because you just need any advantage you have to keep people fired up and geared up and focused on the goal.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to use intimidation against other forces. They need to know how many of them you've taken out before they think about engaging you. I think that would be very effective with Klingons.
Yeah, it's intimidation, but I think it's mostly about unit cohesion and pride, right? Like you want, when you have the USS Zeus coming in, it's like, oh, the bug zapper's here, those guys are badasses, with that kind of thing, right? It's it can really kind of
the reputation that the Sutherland has for being party animals,
right? Yeah, totally.
I guarantee you that they have something on the exterior of the ship that's visible at the very least, maybe not nose art, but
a teardrop, just one teardrop there in nacelle.
So Thomas, I have to ask: is the bug zapper a call out to the dropship in Aliens?
It's I wonder if if one of those things that I just saw and they just lived in my brain. The reason I thought of it, overt reason I thought of it, was that Jem'Hadar ships are called bugs, like the Jem'Hadar fighters are called bug ships, or at least when I was haunting the internet in the 90s, when they were new, I kept seeing them referred to as bugs, so I thought Bug Zapper was a fun name for a Defiant.
Very nice. Excellent.
Good. Okay. So I know we're on limited time because Thomas has a hard stop tonight. And I'm sorry, I got to give him time to spout what he can about being at the season 3 premiere of Picard, which of course matches ships, because we know a lot of STO ships are going to be premiered this season. So talk to us, Thomas, just fanboy with us for a second. Give it to us.
Yeah, it was great. It was a ton of fun. It's always dazzling a bit to be in the presence of all those celebrities and stuff. I will say, ship related, there are a lot of amazing ship shots in Picard, a lot of new ships. I think people are going to be excited to see some great looks at the Titan. They spend a lot of time admiring the ships, which I think is kind of new for this era of Star Trek. We haven't gotten a lot of that. So you're going to get a lot of great lingering shots on all this new stuff. It's going to be really cool. And I want to say it was really cool to see is they actually canonized a few new STO ships, including the Pathfinder class, which is the USS Voyager A. They have a little, this is coming out after that episode goes live, but there's a little screen readout that shows the Enterprise F and the Voyager A, and the Voyager A is a Pathfinder class, which is in one of the STO ships we used in Utopia Phoenicia. So that's very, very exciting.
We see the Voyager A's shuttles in the last episode of Prodigy.
Yeah, I'm really curious, what it'll look like in Prodigy. I'm not sure if they synced up on that, but we'll see what happens.
You would hope so, but I guess they're their own thing, I guess.
Yeah.
What was your biggest star moment at the premiere?
For me personally, this might not mean that much to some people, but I just I got to chat a bit with Doug Drexler and John Eves, who are Starship illustration legends. So that was always a pleasure when I get the chance to do that.
Awesome.
That is so cool. And just for my own self, it's fulfillment. Did you spot Jerry Ryan anywhere in the crowd? Was she? Were you within 10 feet of her?
You're obsessed, man.
Yeah, she was there. Patrick Stewart was there. It's all the cool. It's really cool to see the celebrities, but I don't know that I have a lot to talk to them about. So I'm usually more excited about guys like, John Eves and Doug Drexler, the people behind the scenes in the art department who are I have things to talk about with them, right? As opposed to just like, oh, you're really cool in the show, but like I can say, hey, this. I feel like I have an intelligent conversation with those guys. So I enjoy seeing them the most.
Well, just so you know, I get the same feeling. Well, no, I'm not going to lie, not the same as Jerry Ryan, but I get the same feeling being around creators like you and Aaron and Jim and anybody we interact with. When we interact with people from Clear Skies, it's the same because you get that same creative energy, and everyone's helping build the foundation for the next 55 years of Star Trek, which is super, super cool. So, Thomas, it's so awesome, that we get to have you here too, knowing that you're taking the lead with STO.
No, it's an honor for sure. I really appreciate you having me on.
Cool. All right. It's gratitude time, it sounds like. So mine's simple. I'm going to shout out the old brick and mortars because we're all part of this great Star Trek universe, especially all of our great brick and mortars out there. This time, Joe DeMarco submits Gauntlet Games in Lincoln, Nebraska. So go brick and mortar, Gauntlet Games. Thank you so much for your support. Why don't we go Aaron, Thomas, Jim for gratitude?
Oh boy, I'm going to honestly be grateful to science fiction authors in general right now, because I whenever I'm feeling, let's just say I'm feeling like creatively dead, there's just nothing kind of coming up over the past few days, I can find like a completely new author and like devour a book and go, okay, now my batteries are recharged. I don't have to, I'm not getting any ideas from it. But now it's like, okay, now I just have a different kind of look on the world because of something that I read, and it's made me think. So, hey, science fiction authors out there, thank you, all of you.
Sweet. Absolutely. Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, I want to thank Dave Blass and Brian Tostowski. So Dave Blass is the production designer on Star Trek Picard. Brian Tostowski is the VFX supervisor, and these two gentlemen were instrumental in getting the STO ships into Picard and by extension into Topu Phoenicia. And the Ross that started out as a Star Trek adventure ship, they ended up using that in Picard, so it got canonized. So I'm very, very grateful that they were willing and open to working with us. They had an open mind about it. A lot of people, I think, would say, "Oh, that's a silly video game," not giving us the time of day. But no, those guys are great. So I just wanted to give them a shout out and say thanks.
They get it. That's an awesome shout out. All right, Jim, take us out.
I want to thank Aaron and Thomas for coming on the show again. Really appreciate it. Love hearing your insights. Love having you here. You inspire me every day, whether you know it or not, with your writing and your artwork and your presence on social media and just like convincing back and forth. Thank you, Michael, for running the show, keeping things online, keeping things on track, keeping that spreadsheet updated. Because there are days when I come in here to do the recording, like I have no idea what we're talking about, but I'm just going to riff and have a good time. And like, oh, hey, look, Thomas and Aaron are on today. This is awesome. Let's do it. So thank you for keeping things on track. I know every good program needs a person holding the reins, and you're holding the reins. So I am grateful to you. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank the fans, because you Star Trek Adventures fans and Star Trek fans in general, you are keeping this game going. Now heading into year 7, and I appreciate you. Couldn't do this game without you. We wouldn't do this game without you, because if you weren't there, then why would we do it? And so thank you to all the fans, as always. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, good. The conversation will continue. IDIC.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll see you all soon. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.